Hi everybody, there's one last thing we need to talk about, and so I've kind of typed some stuff out here for you. We need to talk about collecting accounts receivable. So we've talked before about when we make credit sales, guess what? Our clients don't always pay. And so how do we deal with that? So we've assumed previously that everybody pays their bills, and guess what? They don't. So we need to have ways to estimate how much to essentially write off. So let's work together first on brief exercise 7.6. There's two methods that we can use. We can use either the balance sheet approach, which is the one we're going to use in this problem, or you can use the income statement approach. So if we look at brief exercise 7.6, we see that there's $60,000 currently in accounts receivable. $40,000 of that $60,000 is 1 to 30 days past due. $25,000 is 31 to 60 days past due. 61 to 90, 12,000, and over 92,000. So we have an estimate. So the other amounts, so we have the current is 60,000. So the other categories have amounts that are days past due, but so those we would consider those are basically our non-current accounts receivable. So our credit department, basically what you would do is go back and look and see on average how according to how old an accounts receivable is, how likely are you to collect it. So we look at the table below, and it says of the current receivables outstanding, we expect that 2% will be uncollectible, 1 to 30, 4%, 31 to 60, 16%, 61 to 90, 40%, and over 90, 90%. So we're using the balance sheet approach here. So this is the first of the two approaches. So right now, we want to know, for part A, our uncollectible accounts expense, assuming that we have a $1,400 credit balance in our allowance for doubtful accounts. So our allowance for doubtful accounts, if you go look at the PowerPoint, read the chapter, remember, is a contra asset account. So that counts against our accounts receivable. So we're using the word account a lot, so hopefully you aren't getting too lost. So we're recognizing with uncollectible accounts expense at the same time that we incur expense when we make those credit sales, just because we know that not all of them will be paid. So this is essentially part of the matching principle. So let's age. Then what we're doing here is when we put 1 through 30, 31 through 60, 61 through 90, and over 90, we're aging those accounts receivable. So for 1 through 30, so here's our current amount was 60,000. So if you look below, our current receivables outstanding is 2%. So we expect that of that 60,000, 2% will be uncollectible. Okay? So that means 60,000 times 2% is $1,200. Format that pretty so it makes sense. Oops, wrong way. There we go. Okay, so of our current amount, 60,000, 1,200 we expect will not be collectible. So let's do the same for our 40,000. So we expect that 4% of those will be uncollectible. So 40,000 times 0.4 is $1,600. Now we're going to do this for all of our categories. So 31 through 60 days past due, there's 25,000 there in that category, and we expect that 16% of that amount will be uncollectible. So that's $4,000. Okay. 61 through 90, $12,000 in there, and we expect that 40% is uncollectible in that category. And so that's $4,800. Over 90, we're expecting to collect virtually none of that, which that's not terribly surprising. If people haven't paid their bill within 3 months, they're probably not going to. So times 0.9 there, and so that gives us $1,800 there. So of all of these uncollectible amounts between our current and then the aged accounts, let's add all those up. 1,200 plus 1,600 plus 4,000 plus 4,800 plus 1,800. $13,400 is going to be a credit in our allowance for doubtful accounts. So we go back and look at the problem, and we know that there's already $1,400 in allowance for doubtful accounts. So remember, this is a contra asset account. So we already had some doubtful accounts that we've kept some money aside for. So if there was already $1,400 in there, that means we need 13,000 minus 1,400, and we need 12,000. Okay. So if we're going to do a journal entry, we recognize the expense. Now again, we've already realized there was already a balance, so there already had to have been an expense balance as well. So we recognize the expense. And now we need to recognize the allowance for doubtful accounts. Oops. Okay. So that is the balance sheet approach for the first part. So let's assume that there's a $1,600 debit balance. If we go back and look at the problem. So we want to record the company's uncollectible accounts expense, assuming we have a $1,600 debit balance in our allowance for doubtful accounts prior to making the necessary adjustment. So apparently we collected more than we thought we would, so that's why we have a debit in there. So if we have a debit, our previous $1,600 debit balance, so let's think about this in T account fashion. So here's our allowance. Right now, we have $1,600 in there. We have put in a $13,400 credit balance from the amount that we determined needs to be in there from aging our accounts receivable. So in order to get these to balance, $13,400 credit and a $1,600 debit, we need to put $15,000 in there. And that needs to be a credit. There we go. So our adjusting entry becomes uncollectible accounts expense, debit, and allowance for doubtful accounts, a $15,000 credit. Oops. Okay. So 13,400 plus 1,600 is 15,000. So that's how we got there. All right, so that is the balance sheet approach. So now let's work on the income statement approach. So the income statement approach basically just estimates from the income statement how much is going to be uncollectible. So let's look at brief exercise 7.7. So we have a gross accounts receivable there of 5 million at the beginning of the period. And we have a net realizable value of $4,925,000. During the period, we wrote off accounts receivable of $100,000, and we collected $7,835,000. From our credit customers. Our credit sales for the year amounted to $9 million. And of those credit sales, 1% is estimated to be uncollectible. So let's work through this together. So I'm going to get rid of this. So remember, this is the income statement approach. So we know that of our net realizable value of our accounts receivable, is what we need to figure out. So we're going to start with our accounts receivable beginning balance. So we know it was here, $5 million. Get this all pretty format here. Get rid of those decimals. There we go. Okay. So we need to add our credit sales for the period. So this would have happened over the course of the year. So that was an additional $9 million. And now we need to get rid of our write-offs. So our accounts receivable write-off was $100,000. So we got that from that piece of data. And now we need to figure out what we collected. Because if we collected it, we obviously don't have it outstanding anymore. So we're going to take that out of our total. So that was $7,835,000. So that gives us an accounts receivable ending balance of $6,065,000. Okay, oops, one extra zero, hold on. There we go. So $6,065,000. So now we need to figure out what our allowance for doubtful accounts balance was. So our allowance for doubtful accounts, we realize that 1% is uncollectible. So let's go look at that. So we know that $5 million was our beginning balance. And we go look and we say we have our net realizable value of $4,925,000. So that's what we think our accounts receivable are actually worth. So if we subtract those two, we know the difference between them, $75,000, has to be our allowance for doubtful accounts. That's our beginning balance. So 75 grand in there. Now we need to add our expense. So remember, we estimated 1% to be uncollectible over the course of the year. So here, and we had credit sales for the year of $9 million. So all we need to do is multiply 9 million times 1%, so 0.01. And actually, let's just go ahead and put the total over here. And that's $90,000. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, we've already written some of this off. So we wrote off $100,000. So we're going to take that out. Okay. And so that's actually going to be a negative. So let's go ahead and we're subtracting that $100,000 write-off. So again, we'll make this all pretty here. And so that means that our allowance for doubtful accounts ending balance is going to be our $75,000 plus 90 minus 100,000. So that's $65,000. Okay. So that allows us to finish off our calculations. So our ending net realizable value is going to be our $6,065,000 minus, so our accounts receivable balance at the end is what we're starting with, $6,065,000 minus our allowance for doubtful accounts amount, which we calculated. So 65 grand. That means our net realizable value is $6 million. Let's put some nice commas in there. Okay, that's all there is to it. So if you have any troubles with your homework after looking at this video, shoot me an email and I'll be happy to help you out. But this is all we didn't cover.